It's been approximately 9 months since we last addressed the Senate committee. That's enough for a child to be conceived and carried to term. Yet in Gaza, we see more death than life. 2 weeks after our testimony, our colleague Sameh was killed along with his wife Fatima, their 4 children Muhammad, Hiba, Zaina, and Zain by an Israeli airstrike against his family home. And many more of Sameh's family were killed that night. Explosive weapons are indiscriminate in nature, and children are 7 times more likely to be killed by blasts than adults. Today, the situation in Gaza is remarkably worse than the catastrophe we described in November. Systemic obstruction of aid has made it so that the Israeli siege blocks 83% of food aid reaching Gaza. The targeting of schools has left 70% damaged or destroyed, and that's more than the number of schools in Ottawa. Attacks against health facilities and displacement shelters are countless, and every red line has been crossed. In 11 months, thousands of children have been maimed, and almost 21,000 children are missing. They're under the rubble. They're buried in unmarked graves or detained by Israel. And the mental health conditions for children and their caregivers are abhorrent. Gaza has roughly the same number of children as Calgary, Montreal, and Toronto combined. And 80% of the children of Gaza were experiencing mental distress prior to the start of this war. Denial and obstruction of humanitarian aid is so systemic that our health workers manage pediatric amputees and burn patients with only breathing techniques and the equivalent of Tylenol. In Gaza, 10 children are losing a limb or more every day. Dr. Jamal Imam from our health team says, imagine you're a surgeon with a patient whose limbs have been severed, who is bleeding profusely, and you're expected to save his life with your hands tied behind your back and your eyes blindfolded. At Save the Children, we work in the world's largest humanitarian crises. But let me tell you what makes the situation in Gaza different. Almost the entire population has been displaced, and the so-called evacuation orders against a besieged population continue. More than 14,100 children in Gaza have been killed, and the almost 1.1 million children have been starved at the fastest rate the world has ever seen. Palestinian children are the only children in the world who are systematically prosecuted in military courts. Children experience abuse, ill treatment, and other practices during their detention that could amount to torture. And most importantly, the escalating hostilities against vulnerable populations are met with inadequate measures by countries with the power and the influence to slow or stop the horror. And before I pass you over to my colleague Patrick, please remember that the unbelievably cruel conditions that Palestinian children are surviving, the preventable deaths that they are dying, and the grave violations that they are subjected to in this war are also a result of 17 years of blockade and decades of occupation.